He declared that even a robot vacuum could perform my duties, so I went back to my career. Months later, he sent our daughter to school with a bag of pills, and Child Protective Services came knocking. My husband believed running our household was a task so simple a machine could manage it. 3 months down the line, our daughter was stopped by authorities for carrying a bag of prescription drugs to school because he packed the wrong bag. She's now labeled the drug kid. We're under weekly scrutiny from social services, and I nearly lost the promotion I'd spent 15 years chasing. All because the man who belittled my efforts couldn't handle paying a utility bill, doing laundry, or checking a schedule. Yes, I'm still married to him, for now. My spouse insisted that managing the home was so basic a robot could do it, so I took a job and left him to handle everything. Then he mistakenly sent our daughter to school with his mother's medications instead of her lunch, triggering a child services investigation while she earned the nickname, the Pill Girl. He nearly lost his job and put our kids at risk because he forgot to pay the electricity bill. My husband, Tim, always said keeping the house in order was the simplest task. Preparing meals, cleaning, washing clothes, helping with schoolwork, packing lunches, driving to activities, making beds, grocery shopping. Everything except his job seemed effortless to him. He'd get home by 5 p.m. and be lounging with a drink by 6, while I'd been on my feet since dawn and wouldn't rest until bedtime. It didn't bother me much until I noticed Tim's true feelings about my work. Small remarks at dinner, which I brushed off, started to pile up. For instance, when our daughter Leela mentioned her friend's mom, a doctor, Tim would say, "Now that's a real job," staring right at me. At company events, when asked about my work, he'd say, "She's just a homemaker." The more I reflected, the angrier I became. He'd walk by as I cleaned bathrooms, chuckling, "Tough gig." During school meetings, he'd cut me off to explain what the teacher meant, as if I couldn't grasp basic conversation. When I fixed the dishwasher using an online tutorial, he told his buddies I got lucky pushing buttons. He'd video call his mom while I cooked, panning the camera to me and saying, "Look, Mom, Jane's pretending to be busy again." When I organized our taxes and bills annually, he joked that even a trained animal could sort papers. When neighbors commented on my exhaustion, suggesting I needed help, he'd quip that a maid would be pointless since Jane barely did anything a robot couldn't handle. The more I dwelled on it, the more furious I became. Then during a family dinner, I hit my breaking point. Tim's brother was visiting, and Tim was boasting about his recent promotion, which I was genuinely proud of. When his brother asked what I'd been up to, I felt a spark of excitement. Rarely did anyone ask about me. I started to answer, but Tim cut in with, "Oh, you know Jane, she doesn't do much. Probably her biggest choice is paper or plastic bags." Everyone laughed, even my kids. I sat there cutting my steak and something snapped. I'd been a marketing manager before Leela was born, but Tim insisted one of us stay home. So I applied to 5 jobs and quickly landed an offer at a tech firm. The salary was $15,000 less than Tim's, but I took it. On Sunday, I cooked Tim's favorite meal, roasted chicken. As we ate, I casually mentioned I'd gotten a job and would start Monday. Tim laughed as if I were joking. "Really? Doing what?" he asked, his face shifting as I described the marketing role. The kids looked confused, as if they couldn't imagine me working outside the home. "You're not serious," Tim said. "Who's going to handle everything? The kids have activities, Leela's got her performance coming up, and my mom needs her meds picked up weekly." "You'll figure it out," I replied, taking another bite of chicken. The next morning, I left at 7 a.m. Tim was fumbling with the coffee machine. Leela complained her soccer uniform wasn't clean. Jake couldn't find his math book. I grabbed my bag and coffee tumbler and walked out. My first week was incredible. I'd forgotten how fulfilling it felt to use my brain for something beyond family logistics. My colleagues treated me like a person with valuable ideas. Meanwhile, my phone exploded with messages. Tim missed a key work meeting to pick up Jake from school. Leela wore dirty gym clothes. They ate takeout 4 nights straight. By the second week, Tim was pleading with me to quit. "This isn't working, Jane. The house is a mess and I can't juggle my job and all this stuff." "Stuff?" I asked. "You mean the bare minimum?" By the end of month 1, Tim had gained 10 pounds from fast food and his boss pulled him aside to discuss his slipping performance. The kids were constantly grumpy. Leela missed her performance because Tim forgot to mark it on his calendar. Jake flunked a quiz because no one helped him study. By month 3, Tim's life was unraveling. His brother visited for Thanksgiving and was stunned by the state of the house. Dishes were stacked high and laundry was everywhere. Tim looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. His brother teased, "What happened to Mr. Breadwinner?" I hid my grin behind my wine glass. Month 4 was the tipping point. Tim's company announced layoffs. He called me, crying from his car. "Jane, I can't lose this job. Not now. I'm drowning here. I'm sorry. I had no idea what you did." I agreed to help during the layoff scare, but warned him things would change. He had to start pulling his weight at home. He nodded before I could finish. A week later, I got promoted. Things were going well at work and improving at home. Then someone knocked on my office door. "Your husband called 6 times about an issue at your daughter's school." I checked my phone, 34 missed calls, 15 from the school. The police left a voicemail. Tim's last text read, "Jane, please call me. I think I really screwed up, like legal trouble screwed up." My assistant added, "There's a woman here claiming to be your mother-in-law's attorney." I rushed out, heart pounding as I fumbled with my car keys. Though I reached Leela's school in 12 minutes, the drive felt eternal. Police cars lined the lot, their lights flashing against the building. Parents clustered near the entrance, whispering. Tim stood by the principal's office, pale and sweating. When he saw me, he grabbed my arm, pulling me aside, his hands shaking. The principal emerged, her face stern, and ushered us into her office. The small room felt suffocating with Tim, me, the principal, and 2 officers squeezed inside. One officer held an evidence bag containing what looked like pill bottles. Tim fidgeted nervously as the principal explained. That morning, Tim had picked up his mother's prescriptions and left them in the car. When he dropped Leela off late, she grabbed what she thought was her lunch bag. Instead, she brought a bag of prescription drugs to school. Confused by the odd lunch, Leela showed the bottles to her teacher, who alerted the office. The school went into lockdown. Police arrived, and drug-sniffing dogs searched the premises. As the officers described the gravity of bringing medications onto school grounds, even accidentally, my stomach churned. Words like hazard, negligence, and investigation hung in the air. The principal said Leela was traumatized, questioned by police in front of her class, and now crying in the nurse's office. Other parents demanded answers. The school board would meet to discuss the incident. After an hour of questions and forms, the officers decided not to arrest Tim, but warned that the case would be investigated thoroughly. We'd have mandatory meetings with child services. Though Leela was innocent, the school considered suspending her. I found Leela in the nurse's office, her face swollen from crying. She wouldn't look at Tim. On the drive home, she sat in the back, arms crossed, staring out the window. Tim tried to apologize, but she turned up her music. Jake, who'd walked home, was already there. News spread fast in our district. He glared at Tim, disappointed. Kids were texting about Leela as the drug kid. My phone buzzed nonstop with texts from other parents. My boss asking if I'd return to work, and the school counselor scheduling mandatory sessions. Tim's mother called repeatedly, confused about why her medications were at the police station. Tim paced the living room, muttering excuses. He insisted it wasn't his fault, that anyone could have made the mistake. But he couldn't meet my eyes. The doorbell rang. Tim's mother stood there with a woman in a sharp suit who introduced herself as a lawyer hired to handle the situation. She immediately asked about the school's protocols and whether we could contest any disciplinary measures. I excused myself to check on the kids. Leela had locked herself in her room, talking to friends on the phone, her voice shaky as she explained she didn't know what was in the bag. Jake sat at the kitchen table, his homework untouched, looking older than his years. He asked if we were getting divorced. The question hit like a blow. Back in the living room, the lawyer outlined potential consequences. The school might push for expulsion, child services would investigate, and Tim could face charges depending on the investigation's outcome. Our family would be under a microscope for months. Tim's mother claimed it was all a misunderstanding, insisting her son was a good father. But I caught her giving Tim disappointed looks when she thought no one noticed. She'd warned him about being careless with her medications. The lawyer left with a retainer check and a plan to contact the school. Tim's mother pulled me aside, whispering that she'd been telling Tim for months to step up. She'd seen how overwhelmed he was. That evening, no one ate dinner. Leela stayed in her room. Jake grabbed a snack and retreated to his video games. Tim sat at the table, laptop open, frantically researching legal cases about accidental drug possession at school. I tried to focus on work emails, but it was impossible. My promotion felt like a distant memory. Everything we'd built was crumbling because of one careless mistake. The school called again. An emergency board meeting was set for the next morning. We'd have to attend and explain ourselves. Some parents demanded Leela be barred from school activities until the investigation concluded, potentially ending her soccer season. At 10 p.m., Tim broke down on the couch, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. He admitted he'd been so focused on proving he could handle everything that he'd cut corners, leaving things in the car, forgetting appointments, making catastrophic mistakes. But his confession felt empty. The damage was done. Leela's reputation at school was ruined. Our family was under investigation. My job, which had been thriving, was now tainted. Colleagues would whisper about the woman whose family brought drugs to school. I stayed up compiling lists of lawyers, documents, and references. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was cleaning up another mess because Tim couldn't handle basic household tasks. At the emergency board meeting, I dressed professionally. Tim wore his best suit, though it hung loosely from his recent weight loss. Leela refused to come, so we left her with my sister. The meeting room was packed with parents, their faces a mix of worry and judgment. I recognized some from PTA events I'd organized. Now they looked at us like we were criminals. The board president opened the meeting. An hour-long debate followed about school safety, zero-tolerance policies, and the message this sent to students. Parents stood, voicing fears and demanding action. Tim tried to explain, his voice unsteady, describing the chaotic morning and his mother's medical needs. His words met a wall of anger. One parent mentioned alerting the media. Another suggested a petition to ban our family from school grounds. I stood, my voice steady, reminding them of my years of volunteering, fundraisers I'd led, and classroom events I'd planned. I urged them to consider the trauma inflicted on an innocent child who'd grabbed the wrong bag. The room quieted. A few parents looked ashamed, recalling how I'd helped their kids. But the damage to our reputation was clear. Even if Leela stayed in school, she'd carry the stigma. After the meeting, we sat in the car in silence. Tim stared at the steering wheel, defeated. I thought back to all the dinners where he'd belittled my work, calling it the bare minimum. Now he couldn't manage that without causing a crisis that hurt everyone. My phone buzzed with a text from my boss. She was sympathetic but concerned. This family drama could affect my performance and reputation at work. My promotion felt precarious. We got home to find reporters from the local paper parked outside. Someone from the meeting had tipped them off. Drug scare at local school would make a juicy headline. Tim slipped inside and I politely declined to comment. Jake was inside, stress-eating chips and playing video games. He'd skipped school, too embarrassed to face questions about his sister. The house felt like a fortress, with us hiding from the world and each other. Tim's failure to manage basic household tasks had triggered a cascading disaster. One mistake with a prescription bag had undone months of progress. My career, our kids' stability, and our family's reputation were at risk because he couldn't keep track of simple details. The lawyer called with updates. The police investigation would take weeks. Child services would start home visits soon. The school board would vote on disciplinary measures next month. Meanwhile, Leela would attend classes under a safety plan that felt like punishment. That night I lay awake, wondering how we'd ended up here. Tim had mocked my work, yet his incompetence nearly destroyed our family. The man who thought running a household was beneath him proved he couldn't do it safely. The next morning brought more challenges. Leela's soccer coach called to say she'd been benched pending the investigation. Her grades were slipping due to stress. Jake was acting out, clashing with teachers. Our family was fracturing because of Tim's mistake. I threw myself into damage control. Meetings with lawyers, school officials, and counselors filled my days. My supportive boss gave me flexibility, but I knew her patience had limits. My promotion was slipping away as I managed another family crisis. Tim, meanwhile, seemed paralyzed. He went through the motions at work but came home defeated daily. He was starting to see the household tasks he dismissed as overwhelming challenges. The confident man who belittled my work was gone, replaced by someone struggling with laundry and meal prep. 3 weeks into the crisis, child services made their first home visit. They inspected everything, asked pointed questions, and typed notes on their tablets. They interviewed the kids separately. Leela cried during hers. Jake was sullen and uncooperative. Tim stumbled through his explanations. The investigators' report would decide if our family stayed together. Every interaction felt heavy with the possibility of losing our kids. Family dinners became tense, silent affairs, each of us lost in our own fears. I found myself doing what I always did, managing everything. But now it wasn't about proving myself. It was about survival, keeping our family from collapsing because Tim couldn't handle the basic responsibilities he dismissed as trivial. The irony stung. The man who called my work the bare minimum couldn't meet that standard without endangering our kids and ruining our reputation. As another sleepless night turned to morning, I wondered if we'd ever recover. The investigation would end, but the damage to our family might be permanent. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. Tim had shattered more than trust. He'd undermined our children's safety. The next morning, I woke to find Tim gone. A note on the coffee maker said he'd left early to meet his boss about his performance issues. I got the kids ready in silence. Leela barely ate, and Jake wore his headphones the whole time. My team at work was preparing for a critical quarterly board presentation I'd been leading for weeks. It was a showcase of everything I'd achieved since my promotion. But Tim showed up at the office, pacing in the lobby, insisting we talk about a family emergency. He grabbed my shoulders, explaining that Child Services had requested an immediate home inspection after an anonymous tip about neglect. They wanted to visit within the hour. My presentation was 30 minutes away. My boss appeared in the lobby, concerned. I briefly explained the situation, watching her face shift from empathy to worry. She reminded me the presentation couldn't be rescheduled. It was vital to our strategy. Tim insisted I come immediately, as the investigator required both parents. His timing was impeccable, pulling me from a career-defining moment to fix a mess he'd caused. I handed my presentation notes to my assistant, quickly outlining key points. She looked nervous but nodded. I followed Tim to the car, my heels clicking as we hurried. On the drive, Tim admitted he'd forgotten to pay the electric bill and our power was cut off that morning. He was trying to fix it before the inspection. Our home wasn't just dark, it was chaotic from weeks of upheaval. We arrived to find the Child Services investigator, Miss Carter, on our porch, clipboard in hand, checking her watch. Tim fumbled with his keys as I mentally listed everything wrong in our dark, messy house. Miss Carter introduced herself, her tone professional, and explained the anonymous complaint about neglect, citing our kids arriving at school disheveled and hungry. Inside, the house told a grim story. Dishes overflowed the sink. Laundry piled up in every room. Without power, the fridge was starting to smell. Trash bags lined the hallway where Tim had started cleaning but never finished. Miss Carter took photos of everything. Tim tried to explain the power issue as a missed payment, not neglect. But in the dim light filtering through dusty windows, his words sounded weak. I took charge, showing Miss Carter the kids' bedrooms, which I'd kept relatively neat. I presented medical records, school documents, and anything proving we cared for our children. She took notes, her face unreadable. The inspection lasted 2 hours, covering everything from our pantry to the kids' clothes. She asked about our routines, work schedules, and childcare setup. Tim's defensive interruptions only made us look worse. My phone buzzed constantly, texts from my assistant about the presentation's failure, my boss asking where I was, colleagues checking if I was okay. Each message felt like a blow to my career. Miss Carter left, promising a follow-up within 48 hours. Tim slumped on the couch, blaming me for not being home to manage things and prioritizing work over family. The irony burned, given his years of dismissing my household work. I spent the afternoon in crisis mode, restoring power by paying the overdue bill and a reconnection fee, then tackling the house room by room. Tim helped by moving items from one pile to another. The school called. Leela had broken down in class, sobbing. The counselor suggested she come home early. I left Tim with cleaning instructions and picked up Leela, who was curled up in the nurse's office. On the drive home, she opened up. Kids were calling her names, saying her family was trash and her dad was a drug dealer. A rumor spread that she'd be taken by Child Services. She begged to be homeschooled to escape the bullying. At home, I found Tim on the phone with his mother, asking her to provide a character reference for the investigation. During the call, I learned she'd been sharing our situation with her friends, spreading the news through her social circle. That evening, while cooking dinner with our newly restored power, I found more of Tim's oversights. Unopened bills, unsigned permission slips for school events, and a warning from Jake's teacher about missed assignments. The bare minimum had become an impossible hurdle. My boss called during dinner. The board presentation had tanked. My assistant tried, but without my expertise, key issues were missed, jeopardizing our quarterly strategy. She needed me in the office early for damage control. Tim, overhearing, suggested I take sick days or work part-time until things stabilized. He didn't see how his failure to handle basic tasks was unraveling everything I'd built. The next morning brought more chaos. Jake refused school, claiming a stomachache. Leela moved silently, barely speaking. Tim had a critical client meeting he couldn't miss. I stood in the kitchen, pulled in every direction, watching my world fall apart. I decided to ask my sister to watch Jake, drove Leela to school myself, and escorted her to class to ensure she went. Then I headed to work, arriving late to find my team scrambling to save our quarterly goals. My sister texted that Jake spent the morning crying. Leela's teacher emailed about her lack of focus. Tim left frantic voicemails about another child services call. During lunch, I called Miss Carter. She said they'd received more complaints. Someone reported seeing our kids walking to school alone in dirty clothes. The investigation was escalating. I wondered who was reporting us. The timing felt too targeted. Then I recalled Tim's comments about neighbors acting distant lately. Had our family drama become local gossip? That afternoon, my boss called me into her office. She was empathetic but firm. My performance was slipping. My promotion depended on maintaining high standards, and if I couldn't manage, they'd reconsider. I left work early again, finding Tim at home surrounded by cleaning supplies, having done nothing. He'd spent the day researching child services policies, convincing himself we'd lose the kids. His panic was making things worse. The phone rang, Tim's mother. She'd hired a family advocate for the investigation. Then, casually, she mentioned documenting every time Tim called her for help, every crisis he'd caused. Her notes painted a grim picture. Missed school pickups, forgotten appointments, kids calling her crying because Tim forgot dinner. She thought she was helping, but her records were now evidence against us. That evening, I gathered my own documentation. Receipts proving I'd managed household finances, school records from when I was the primary caretaker, and references from teachers I'd worked with. The main room was off limits as child services returned for another visit. Jake's interview lasted 40 minutes. We could hear his muffled voice, but not the words. Leela's was shorter, but left her in tears. The investigators took more photos and notes, their faces unreadable. Leela whispered that they'd asked if she felt safe at home and if anyone had hurt her. Jake said they asked about meals, homework help, and why he'd missed school. Routine questions felt invasive in our situation. My phone rang with another work crisis. A major client threatened to pull out after the failed presentation. My team needed me, but Tim had a mandatory HR meeting about his performance issues, and someone had to stay with the kids. I called the only help I had left, my mother. She drove 3 hours to assist. While waiting, I handled work calls, trying to save the client relationship remotely. Tim returned from his meeting, crushed. He'd been put on a performance improvement plan, one more mistake, and he'd be fired. The man who'd mocked my work now risked losing the job he'd prioritized. My mother arrived and took charge, organizing with precision. She sent Tim to the store with a detailed list, helped Jake with homework, and sat with Leela to talk about school. I rushed to the office, where my team was prepping for an emergency client meeting to save $1 million account. A power outage hit during a child services visit. What a perfect addition to the inspection report. Nothing says stable home like interviews by flashlight while your fridge becomes a health hazard. My assistant had prepped the documents, but the strategy needed my expertise. The client meeting was grueling. They challenged every point, citing the failed presentation and questioning our reliability. I fought for every argument, drawing on years of experience to regain their trust. We barely saved the account, but the victory felt empty. My phone showed missed calls from home. Tim had forgotten his mother's medications again. The pharmacy was closed, and she needed them that night. I called every 24-hour pharmacy until I found one to fill an emergency prescription, then drove there before heading home, adding another task to my endless list. At home, my mother had worked wonders. The house was tidy, the kids calm, dinner ready. But she pulled me aside, whispering that this couldn't continue. The bare minimum had become an unbearable burden. The man who'd called my work trivial had proven he couldn't handle it without jeopardizing our family's stability. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more damage control, and more efforts to fix what Tim's negligence had broken. The bare minimum had never felt so impossible.